Hello and welcome to the Chorus in the Chaos podcast. My name is Jack, and I am, as always, joined by Grayson and Blake. Guys, how are you?
Doing well. Excited for this podcast episode.
Yeah.
I've been building up to it for a while.
Yeah, it is a difficult subject.
Yeah. There was a little bit of conversation on the page of how do you address these things? Do you call it a difficult subject? Do you call it a sensitive subject? Do you call it an important subject? Because inevitably somebody will come into the comments and say, "Well, why is it difficult? The Bible's very clear on
Why
this
is it sensitive?"
So we don't mean it in that sense. We mean it in that today's subject is probably one of the most destructive areas of sin. Not only in the world at large, but in the church also.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, of course, we're talking about tithing tonight.
That too. But before we do that, before we jump into that, a couple disclaimers, a couple housekeeping items.
We haven't even said what the subject is.
We haven't even said what it is yet.
Yeah. Spoiler, it is not tithing.
Although it is not, but they've already read the name of the podcast episode, probably. So we're
that's a dead giveaway.
Sneaky.
Yep.
But they already know. What they don't know is that we have a book to give away.
Ooh.
We have a book. If you've listened to the past few episodes, as a reminder, we had a very generous friend of the podcast donate a handful of these. I've got a couple left. And to the first person who types in the comments of YouTube, the secret phrase, which will come later in the episode, we'll reach out to you, we'll get an address, and we'll mail you one of these devotionals. And it is The Heart of the Reformation, a 90-day devotional on the 5 solas, a neat little book here put out by Ligonier.
So how many of those do we have left at this point?
What a great way.
What was that, Grayson?
I said, how many do we have left at this point?
Two. This one and one more.
Okay.
So we're
coming down to it. You guys better hop on that secret phrase.
Yeah.
That's right.
What a great way to kick off Reformation Month.
That's right.
With your Reformation devotional.
Officially in October. So we are going to be talking about lust and sexual sins this evening. As by way of introduction, we wanted to give a quick warning. It may go without saying, right? But a quick warning to parents out there. This is a sensitive subject. We're not going to be obviously R-rated or anything.
While it will not be crass, it will be.
It is a heavy
maybe
subject.
Something you want to shuffle the little ones out of the room.
So if you typically listen to the podcast with your kids, thank you. We think that's great. But this may be one. Use your own discretion, your own judgment here. But we're just going to give a warning because of the topic. Just buyer beware.
Yes.
So
Did I ever tell you guys the first sermon I ended up preaching? Literally, the first service that I ever preached at was 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. And the context of it is dealing with sexual immorality. And so Paul goes into this lengthy explanation about how if you are committing these deeds, you are defrauding your brother or sister, and therefore, essentially, you are in the same realm as those who are in vileness and impurity. But then he ends it with this warning. If you reject this teaching, meaning teaching against sexual immorality, then you are rejecting Christ. So he fully pulls the apostle card. But I remember preaching that sermon, and I went full bore. I mean, that was just how I'm like, okay, we're going to tackle this subject, I guess, for my first sermon at my church. Yeah. And I was
this assigned to you, this passage? Or did you choose this passage?
Oh, no, it was a seminary paper that I had to write. And then my pastor was like, well, since you've already done the exegesis for it, why don't you preach it?
Right.
And then I went from there to Jude and smaller epistles and then minor prophets. So he's been very faithful to give me difficult subjects, which have been good. But I had probably 4 different people come up to me at the end of it, and they're like, I can't believe you preached on that when I had my 13-year-old kid in the service.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, in one sense I get it. In another, it's like, your kid's 13.
Yeah.
They've heard far worse by this point.
Yeah.
So
I haven't had. I've preached pretty plainly on a lot of pretty wild passages, and I haven't had any feedback. But I always give a little thing to parents the week before and say, Just so you know, for next week.
There was absolutely no warning.
Yeah. Right.
No, we just went right into it.
Yeah. You just dropped it.
You had deacons lock the doors to sanctuary so no one can leave.
Put the chains
Pull
around.
the shades down. Yeah, exactly.
You're going to sit and you're going to listen.
Right.
Turn the amp up a little bit louder than usual. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll be talking tonight on lust and sexual sin. So warning to parents, beware.
Right.
Blake put the outline together. It's a fantastic outline. It's lengthy. So even before we hit the record button, we were sitting here talking. We think this will be 2 episodes.
Probably 2. Yeah.
I can imagine it being 3, but I think probably it'll be at 2. So very likely this will be a part 1 episode. Anything else by introduction, guys? Anything else we should mention?
No, I don't think that we don't want to rush this subject. Yeah. Because it is such a big one and an important one. And I think also, I mean, we're just 3 brothers, that are going to be bringing about the facts of the matter. But if you're listening to this and, this is something that, you find that, sexual sin is this constant stronghold in your life, it can be beneficial to listen to things like this and to read books and things like that. But you should be seeking accountability with your elders at your church, because they love you more than we do. They can help you more than we can. They are more intimately involved in your life than we are. And so while we're trying to, kind of get things, stirred up and maybe get you thinking about it, and kind of laying down some foundational principles, ultimately, your local church is going to be a very, very valuable resource in dealing with this and other kinds of sins. So we want to throw that out there.
They are the ones who are literally tasked with shepherding your souls, and they are the ones to whom God will require an account. We have the privilege of being able to speak into these different things, and yet the local church should be the first and foremost place you go to. So all of us would say, if you're listening to this with an eye towards us being your shepherds, don't do that. Look to the faithful men that God has put in your life and entrust yourself to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well said.
One last point of nuance, I think, in going into this is that we tend to categorize sins, right? And there's sins that we view as respectable sins or small sins with, sarcastic quotes. And then there are large sins and embarrassing sins. I think a lot of people, a lot of Christians in particular, on this subject, lust, sexual sin, because this is viewed as an embarrassing sin, that many people would rather not deal with it or not get help with it or not seek out accountability. They would rather die with it than to actually go through the steps of actually addressing it. A number of years ago, I read a book on Heimlich, the guy that created the Heimlich maneuver, when you're choking to death. Mm-hmm. And probably the most fascinating thing that stood out to me in that book was he gave some statistics of people that die from choking. And the cases of people who begin choking in a restaurant, so they're eating, they start choking, most of those people die. And the reason that they die is the first thought in their mind is, I'm choking, I need to go somewhere by myself and take care of this.
Oh, because they're embarrassed.
Because they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed. The first thought is, I'm embarrassed. And so they will go outside of the restaurant and die in the bushes because they don't want to get help from anybody because they're ashamed. I wonder how many Christians have been running outside into the bushes for years dealing with this sexual sin issue because they're embarrassed to deal with it. But friends, it's not worth It's not worth your soul. It's not worth the destruction and things that it brings. So yes, it may be embarrassing and it may be painful, but it needs to be dealt with. And if you're a child of Christ, it cannot remain. It cannot remain.
No, you'll never be content in hiding sin. I mean, I can tell you that just as a guy who has tried it before in the early stages of my Christian walk, where there's shame, there's attached to it, everything in terms of just wanting to be free from it. But God has designed the local church and godly friends and godly elders and a godly congregation that can come alongside you and actually help you fight sin. That's the whole purpose of why we go to church. We're not a perfect people. We need each other.
Yeah. And you're not and this isn't unique to you. You're not the only one struggling with these kinds of things. You're a dummy if you think that. I mean, it's the statistics are shocking on things like pornography addiction and all of those different kinds of things too. And we'll get into some of that. But to kind of lay down some foundation of where we're going anyway, we want to talk about is initially we want to talk about sex and the context for sexual activity, which of course is marriage. And so we're going to kind of lay down some creative matter as far as marriage and sexual activity and making babies and all kinds of things like that. Then we'll kind of move on to just the damage of sexual sin and what exactly is at risk when we partake in those things and entertain those things. We will then move into kind of some application of the seventh commandment. We'll look at course at Christ in Matthew chapter 5 as he's dealing with unfolding the seventh commandment in a deeper way. And then we'd really like to end it with just some practical advice to kind of help you in this battle. So that's where we're going. And buckle up, and we'll jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. And and this is coming in maybe the last thing I'll say by way of introduction here before we get into foundations.
Yeah,
this entire season has been dedicated to common struggles of the Christian life, and this one, as we alluded to earlier, is extraordinarily common. So I want to reiterate what Blake and Grayson said. If you are ashamed, you have a reason to have shame. Like, it is a shameful thing. It is a sinful, shameful thing. But do not hide. You want becoming, practical advice is like part 4 here. Will probably be in the next episode. I'm just going to come out right now. Confess. Confess. Find someone to confess to, because it will continue to fester. And if I'm just telling you, sexual sin is a unique sin in that it will fester and develop and pervert and get help.
Well, Paul literally lists sexual sin as the only sin that's against one's own body. Right? And there's a destructive aspect to it that I think we simply do not account for when it comes to even the reality of pornography. We live in a different age than the book of Proverbs was written in, but the point remains, it has massive consequences, and these are things that we just simply need to be able to navigate through wisely.
Amen.
Right. So,
all right. Foundations.
All right. Well, to get your foundations, you got to go to Genesis, right?
Yeah. Does anybody have it open? If not, I do.
I got it. Okay, I've got it. Go ahead, Grayson. Though.
So we've all got it open.
Why don't we each read one word? Why don't we each read one word, and then we'll
just do a popcorn reading.
I am not listening to that.
Gosh, can you imagine how
this is really obnoxious? Weird? These guys made this really weirder than it needed to be. This is the part that I don't want my children listening to.
Right.
Grayson, please read Genesis 2.
All right, Genesis 2, 18 through 25. So I'm using the Legacy Standard Bible. It says, "Then Yahweh God said, 'It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him.' And out of the ground Yahweh God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky. And he brought each to see, or to the man to see what he would call it. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. So Yahweh caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And he slept, Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And Yahweh fashioned the rib, which he had taken from the man, into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This one finally is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and were not ashamed."
Yeah. There's so much packed into that passage. I mean, so many, again, foundational kind of issues of marriage, the marriage relationship, gender identity, creation and purpose and sexual activity and all of these different things, the family structure, all of that. So we could go on and on and on about those things, but I think we'd just like to begin by saying Adam does not have a helper that is fit for him. God then creates a helper for him. The man and the woman then, from creation, fit together, and they are made for each other. In fact, the woman, the Isha, is literally taken out of the man. And so she's even given a name that is in relation to the man. So the woman is alone a suitable helpmate for the man. And furthermore, the man alone is suitable for the woman. And so, again, these things that were, easily understood 50 years ago have now been brought back into question, and particularly with some liberal theological kind of settings and things like that. But, I mean, a first grader can understand that if God makes a woman for a man, then it is supposed to be a man and a woman that are together. When God is looking for a helpmeet, he doesn't bring along a buffalo. He doesn't bring along another man. He brings along, in creation, of course, the woman. And then in the text, you see the man and the woman coming together in one flesh. And you kind of have this union and reunion thing going on, that she's taken out of the man, and then they're brought together in union, but they're so perfectly meant for each other that it's almost a reunion, if you will, because again, they're made for each other.
Well, it's a rather wonderful thing too when you look at the ending of that, context where he looks at it and says, "For this reason," meaning on the basis of that one flesh union, they'll now leave mother and father and cleave to each other. Right. And so, I mean, you have the whole theology of marriage just simply built right around there.
Right.
And how much
the
interaction
birth of the new family unit. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So you got the whole, the new family unit coming together after marriage and consummation. So now it's, husband and wife, you are no longer under the umbrella of your parents' authority, and you've got to be big boy and big girl and do your, live your own life, which again is another episode, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, we see God's decree at work. I mean, even later on when he tells Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Only, again, it sounds simple, but only a man and a woman can be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the command and the purpose in all of this, marriage, the context for sexual activity, the context for the family, and the purpose of sexual activity, a purpose of sexual activity is to be fruitful and multiply. And so again, you see God doing something, I think, really interesting here. When I was growing up, so we grew up in town, and we lived in a really weird apartment complex that was built in the 60s. And the streets were really, really curvy, and there was lots of little cul-de-sacs, and there was hundreds and hundreds of duplexes, right? So we lived kind of right smack in the middle. My parents were very strict. My parents were never the parents that let us walk to the store with our friends or go to the mall or anything like that. And they set perimeters for us. So when me and my siblings went outside to play, they said, you can go from here to here. All right. What they didn't do was they didn't tell us okay, each time we go outside, you can't go to the mall, you can't go to the store, you can't walk down the street with your friends, you can't go to the park, you can't go to the skate park or any of those things. They didn't list out each prohibitive thing. they set the limits for us. You can go from here to here, and then we had freedom within those limits. Yeah. What God does, and I think this is a key issue when it comes to sex and sexual expression, is he doesn't just give us a big long list of, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. He sets the field for this is the appropriate outlet for sexual desire, and you have freedom within those appropriate bounds, right? Which is a genius way to bring about the management and the joy of sexual activity. Because imagine if God just made a big long list of things you weren't supposed to do. What would be, knowing mankind, what would be the thing that took place with the big list of no's?
Oh, it would easily be here's either the exception to the rule, or let me, as Romans puts it, be an inventor of evil, where I will just come up with something new and debaucherous that I can participate in.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, somebody check the list. Is that on the list? Oh, okay. We got something else. Yeah, exactly. So again, within the context, particularly speaking of sex, he sets it within bounds for a purpose. Now, interestingly, one of the primary purposes of sex, which we do not want to lose, I think it has been lost in our society, is that sexual activity between a husband and a wife, all things normative, of course, we know that there are exceptions to this because we live in a sinful, fallen world, but all things normative, children are produced from sexual activity. And this is a big deal to God. This is what, in Malachi, he says it very clearly. Do one of you guys have that passage?
I do. So the context that he's dealing with, you have priests that have forsaken their vows that they need to marry within Israel, right? And so, you can tie a New Testament application to that of marrying in the Lord, right? But go back to the context of it, verses 13 through 16. He says, "This is another thing you do. You cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and with groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. And you say, yet, for what reason? Because Yahweh has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. But not one has done so, who has a remnant of the Spirit. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. For I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel, and him who covers his garment with wrong, says Yahweh of hosts. So take heed to your spirit, that you do not deal treacherously."
Yeah. Grayson, what translation was that again?
That one should be, I think that's an Asby.
Okay.
Yeah. So God explicitly says, you have this whole thing of like marriages, marrying outside of Israel, all these different things. But he explicitly says, what is the goal that I have in mind here with you being with your wife and your wife of Israel? Is it not to produce godly offspring? Right. Yeah. And all the Presbyterians said,
Amen.
Amen. Right. That there would be godly offspring. And so when sexual activity then is taken out of the context that it's supposed to, it actually destroys, one of the goals, or one of the purposes, rather, not goals, but one of the purposes of that sexual activity. So we have God creates sex in the context of marriage. All things being normative, there are children, of course, that are produced. And again, we know that that is not always able to be achieved, but when man and woman are joined, that is the sort of union that is meant to produce offspring. So again, we see in Malachi that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
As we jump to the New Testament. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I always find it interesting when people in our culture are shocked that sex works. Right? A baby is produced from the act of union that God has given us to actually produce offspring. And we've built an entire industry around it when it comes to birth control and abortifacients. I mean, they're one and the same, but the abortion industry as a whole is literally an undoing of what God has said is actually the very telos or purpose of marriage in one sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly a purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you think about the again, to think about the common struggle here, and it's none of us have to wax eloquently about the problems of sex in our culture. Like you could be half awake and realize everything is going, like, it's wild out there.
Right.
But it goes back to the creation mandate. Like, all of this is foundational because it goes right into the creation of who we are and our purpose being made in the image of God, and our commit with the way God has commissioned us to act and how we're to interact with each other. Like, it's right there. So this sexual liberation theology, this liberal theology that has sprouted up, and it's aimed right at undoing the creation.
Right.
Like it is aimed at undoing all the way back at Genesis. This isn't, it's not just an issue that aimed at, fun. Oh, it's limiting fun. Oh, it's, I ought to be able to express myself or whatever it is. It is a satanic attack against the creation mandate established by God in the garden.
Right.
It is so serious. It is such a serious thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, not to kind of reiterate what you guys are saying here, marriage then becomes the way that this is supposed to be done. Right. It's clear. It's absolutely clear in Scripture. It's not vague. And it's done in marriage because it upholds the creation mandate. It upholds God's establishment of the family and the order and the structure. Read any amount of research, you go Google it, whatever. Families, children, everything is better when there are two parents in the house. Like, there's books and books and books about it. Like, everything is better because we were fundamentally made that way to operate.
Right.
It is, God did it and it was good.
Right.
And it is attack against, I mean, it's right out of the pits of hell
to
undo this stuff, and it is destroying our culture.
Well, I always find it interesting too. You look at, I mean, this has been a trope for a long time, how people have talked about the reality of how the secularization of America has happened. And they say God first, family second, and then what's third, typically? Church, yeah. And so the reality that they're speaking to, though, is that this idea comes that there is a God, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They set literally everything into motion and created ex nihilo, from nothing. And so once you get into evolutionary theory, boom, that's done.
Right.
Once you attack the nuclear family, boom, that's done. What do you have left at that point? And where are we in our culture? And yet we shake our heads and wonder what's going on in our nation. The reality is we've immediately from day one attacked the very foundations of the universe that God has set into motion with His Word.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we say foundations for the issue.
Right.
We're talking about foundation. Like, this is like atoms and neutrons foundational. Like, it is the way we are made. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of also reminds me of, I mean, because you have the breakdown, of course, of the family and the secularization and humanistic teachings and degrading humans to simply to animals. I mein, there's so many things that are covered in that Genesis text that we read. I mean, even the distinction of men and animals. I was reading the Wonderful Works of God by Bavinck, and I think like in the first chapter or two, he talks about that it is set in men's hearts this longing for eternity, and it's the thing that it separates us from animals, and that animals they live with the in the momentary, in the sensuous. I mean, they can sense sensations, and a dog knows that it feels good to be pet, and he knows that it's bad to be kicked, and things like that. But a dog doesn't appreciate, relationship with God or art or philosophy or any of these things that humans do. Yeah. And so when you take the very thing that separates men and women, and you try to force men into the box of living just for the sensuous, for the sexual pleasures, for those kinds of things, it doesn't work because we're not made that way. We're not made. We cannot be satisfied with simply the sensuous. And the problem is when we lust, or when we commit adultery, or when we commit sexual sin, even as Christians, what we're essentially doing is we're saying, I can be satisfied with the sensuous, and I don't need it in the way that God has orchestrated it and with the way that God has planned it, but I can take that good gift, rip it out of its context, and use it for my own devices. And then we wonder, well, why are there so many of these diseases, and why is there so much shame that comes up? Why is it so mentally and spiritually destructive?
Yeah.
Why is it so addicting? And so we get into these things of like, why is all this? Well, again, when you take something and you rip it and you use it for something that it's not meant to be used for, and you lie to yourself, again, even as a Christian, and say, well, I have needs. These are the things that I need to be, satisfied, or to feel complete, or I'm lonely, or all of the excuses that we use. When we do that, we're essentially saying, God, you're a liar, and I know what's best for me.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we act in a way that is sexually sinful.
Yeah. Solomon, literally tells the one who pursues the harlot, you are a senseless beast, in the sense that he equates them to the dumb, mute ox in the field.
And that's such a deep line. That's such a deep passage. It's not like just a sick burn, right? Like you're just a big dumb animal, but it's like, okay, you're taking aspects, you're shutting down the human aspects, and you're reducing yourself
to the removal of the imago Dei. Like you're not worthy of this. Right. Like the way you're acting, you don't have the dignity of being made in the image of God. You're acting like a beast of the field. Yeah.
Right. When you think about it, there is a simple glory that the Christian especially has, but even the pagan man and women, or man and woman, I should say, who are abiding in the creation mandate have, as they fulfill just a basic aspect of that creation ordinance, where they are reflecting the very glory of God by fulfilling the dominion mandate as he has decreed it. Yeah. Even if they might be completely unawares of it, they might be God haters who reject him, and yet they are still, in essence, living according to the way God has created.
Grace. Yeah, common grace is still in play when they're living out within the parameters that God has set. Yep. So as we look at the foundation kind of issue, again, this is of all and of utmost importance, and I hope it doesn't feel like we're beating a dead horse here, because if you get this wrong, if sex is subjective, or if it's based on feeling, or if you try to take the picture of marriage and mix it up and move pieces around and make it something that it is not, which, by the way, God is the one that defines what marriage is. You can call the various sexual perversions marriage, but it doesn't make them marriage. God defines what marriage is. Yeah. So when you take marriage then, and you can bring it into the New Testament, of course, in Ephesians 5, then we have all of these beautiful pictures. Like, okay, this marriage thing is not just an arbitrary kind of deal. It's not something that God just willy-nilly said, well, okay, one man, one woman, together for life. They should be producing children, and that's it. Remember, God doesn't do anything arbitrarily, and he doesn't do anything without purpose. Everything he does has ultimate purpose. Yeah. And so what we see in Ephesians 5 with Christ and the church is illustrated by marriage, which God created.
Yeah. You want me to read that?
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Don't let me monologue, boys. Don't let me do it. Just interrupt.
You were doing such a good job. I was just
I know. Yeah,
for a moment there, I was like, "Oh, I'm part of this podcast too." Like,
this is the I was Blake Lavery hour.
Yeah,
in a good way. In a good way, I was like, "This is really good." Like, I'm just taking this in. Like, oh
Jack
wait,
just clicks the mute button on Blake.
Yeah. If we keep this up, Jack will be our first subscriber.
Ephesians 5:22 through 25, and then I'll read 31 through 33 as well. Paul says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." Going through 25, yeah, sorry. "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." And then I'll jump ahead. There's a few verses in there, but for the sake of time, 31 through 33. "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband."
Yeah, I mean, you could preach 10 sermons on that passage.
Yeah.
There's so much packed into these
passages
things.
for this, all the simple and yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that the beautiful thing about Scripture? Is simple enough for a child to understand, deep enough for the most brilliant theologian to plunge for all eternity, right?
Yep.
Yeah. You could never reach the bottom of that passage.
No, I mean,
with all the ties back to Genesis and the mystery of Christ, like,
right.
Paul himself says that this mystery is great, right?
Yeah.
He looks at that union and compares it to the gospel. And, well, as a husband, I'm always looking at passages like that, especially, and thinking, gosh, for one, tall calling, right? But for two, it's like the more and more that I understand about Christ and the gospel, the more I should be a better husband. And so should I not be, therefore, all the more diligent of a student of the gospel, that I might apply that in my marriage and rebound that marriage to the glory of God, that others might see and, Lord willing, come to believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but you see here again this picture of man and woman coming together, and what was taken in Genesis and is like elemental to our being as people, right, is then expounded in this vertical sense like a laser, right? Because it's drawn up into Christ, and all of a sudden this picture of what we are is expanded in ways that I can't even like begin to describe, right? Like I made that silly comment in a few podcasts ago about we were talking about this and everyone got mad at me and made me cry.
What?
That didn't happen.
Why don't I remember this?
Oh, it's a classic vague book.
I edited that. No, that didn't happen.
That's like the hey, can you pray for this unspoken request?
Yeah. We know it's lust, Gerald. Okay.
Yeah.
So
no, but I
calling
kind
it
of
unspoken.
Even before I said it, I was like, I don't know that I fully believe this, but here's this wild thought I had, so let me just throw it out there.
Oh, that
yeah,
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And Blake and I were just like attack mode.
And you're like, you guys.
I was just sitting here thinking in the comment section, they finna drag you, Jack.
but and what I said was the primary purpose of marriage, and that's what we quibbled over. And even after I thought of it, that's probably not the best way to word it.
Yeah.
But the reason I said,
you even corrected yourself, I think.
I did.
You were like, no, not
a primary or one of the main functions of marriage is to teach us about Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the point here. And it's incredible to me. It is, and again, this mystery is profound. It's incredible to me that was true in Genesis. That everything that God was establishing about marriage, about man, about woman, about gender reality, about the purpose of our being, the fulfillment that we find in each other, was true about Christ then.
Right.
Christ and the church. So to say that these things are trivial, and that's what ends up happening. And this is what is so damning. And I'll just say that damning about our culture's, there are many things, right? But so damning about our culture's view on sexuality is because we've trivialized sex so much.
Right.
That it's meaningless. Like I think, you know, the show Friends, I hate the show Friends.
Wait, what show was that?
Friends, 90s sitcom.
I never heard of it.
You don't know what Friends is? You guys stop messing with me. I know you know what Friends is.
Jack started really good just then.
For like a split second you had me. I'm like, am I the only one that knows what this show is?
So you just have to say with enough confidence. You say that no with enough confidence and just.
But both of you did it together in a first split second. I was like, hang on a second.
There was this mind meld that two of us were like,
the Baptist mind meld.
It was the Baptist mind collective. Yeah. But if you've ever watched that show, one of the things that drives me nuts, and to be fair, not to disparage Friends, this is true of most sitcoms and most just Friends. You can disparage Friends. We'll throw it down too. But the thing that frustrates me about it, and I've pointed this out to my wife, is because we've watched a few episodes along the way, right? And I say, the thing I dislike about this is it makes sex so unbelievable. And every joke is about sex. Like, and I pointed this out. One time I went through and I said, I'm going to count how many jokes are about sex as we were watching it. And it was like 85% of this. And it's just an absurd amount. And the entire thing is a thrust to make sex meaningless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sex is fun. In Hebrews, right? Don't defile the marriage bed. And yet, that's popular entertainment.
That is what's fun. It's fun. It's meaningless. Oh, I should do what I want. Like the whole thing is about that, and that's what our culture has embraced.
Right.
So much.
You know, Friends. And I read a thing that Friends actually did more cultural damage. So I read I don't even know who it was. It might have been like Tim Challies or somebody, one of those guys that analyzes things deeply. But they were saying that not only the trivialization of sex, but that Friends was the first big sitcom, like really big sitcom, that was not based around some kind of like family structure. Because you think about all the old sitcoms, it's all like at least in some way family based. Whether it's old, like old shows or whatever. The only exception that I can really think of would be maybe MASH or something like that. But coming in, it was like, okay, this is the family element is actually removed, and this truly is just about a group of friends
who sleep with each other.
Right. And so you have this weird cultural shift, which we see today. I mean, look how low the family is viewed today, and how trivialized sex is today. And we're going to place all this blame square on the shoulders of Friends.
Huh?
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot,
jerks,
guys. Yeah,
look what you did.
Some friend you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You're not a friend at all.
We got a couple people that are like, I really love that show. It's like,
it's a big part of my childhood. Yeah, but no. All I know, my experience. All that with it.
Oh, your experience with Friends. Are we still on that?
I guess not. I guess not. I guess we're.
Jack's like,
moving
on.
Pull it back in. I'm trying to pull it back in. Go ahead,
I even saw you did the pull it back in motion too.
Yeah, I did. I did. No, let's get one more Friends.
No, it's dumb. It's dumb. I had never seen it. I'd never watched it growing up, and people were like, "It's the funniest show. It's so funny." I tried to watch the first 2 episodes, and truly, it wasn't. I was going in thinking this is going to be the best show ever. Wasn't funny at all.
Not good. Yeah.
Not at all. It wasn't even remotely funny.
I said I'm trying to pull it back in. I'll say this. One of the reasons I like Seinfeld more than Friends. And here's another thing that's I think is really damaging about Friends, and I'll compare Seinfeld and Friends because I like Seinfeld. And I'm not saying Seinfeld is a beacon of morality here. Because they do a lot of the same thing. The difference though is Friends is we're likable, fun people. You want to be with us.
Right.
Seinfeld is they're terrible people. They don't make them up to be.
They do not.
You know what I mean? They
don't. Nobody wants George Costanza as a husband. Or Kramer.
They know they're terrible people. So but they're doing the same thing. Sex is meaningless. Relationships are meaningless. But they don't present them in a way that hey, I could really be friends with these people. You're
right. These guys are unlikable. Yeah.
Well, it's I'm watching their life implode. And it's a satire, right? The whole point of it is to mock it.
Absolutely. Right. Friends is the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite because sex is meaningless, relationships, whatever. Let's just have whatever. And, you want to be friends with us so bad. Oh, we're such good friends. Everything works out in the end. Oh, you slept with my best friend. It's okay. honey, let me give you a hug. And it's like, you know what I mean? It's just nonsense. Like, it's so detached from reality. Anyway, I brought up Friends.
That reminds me of Genesis when,
yes,
there's no easy way to bring it back. We have to just lob off the limb and
I did have a purpose for saying all this. So all that to say, we've trivialized it so much that we have forgotten that the mystery is profound. That there is so much substance that is baked into who we are as people in marriage, in the man and the wife, that to trivialize it is to undermine the foundation principles of creation, who we are, and Christ and his church.
Right. I tell me if I'm going too far in this.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. All right, buckle up.
The turntables.
Here we go. So if you have Christ in the church pictured by the marriage, then it seems to me that all of the elements that pertain only to marriage then somehow speak to that relationship of Christ and the church. And so whether it's producing children or whether it's sexual intimacy or any of those things, like all of those things then are pictured with a purpose for Christ and the church and the marriage. And so to, again, take any of those things out of that picture and to pervert them, whether it's sex outside of marriage or having children outside of marriage or, whatever the case may be, what you're doing is you're taking an illustration that God has laid down, a masterpiece, and you're painting over it.
Yeah.
I think I texted you guys the other day. I was watching, I hadn't watched it in a long time, Batman 1989.
Oh yeah.
With Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that classic
the other day too.
That classic scene, it's that mind meld. That classic scene where they're in the, where the girl is waiting in the art museum. And there's all this fine art everywhere, and you can just tell. I mean, everybody's very well dressed, very expensive kind of setting, and the Joker gasses the whole place and comes in. And what's he immediately start doing? Like
just painting right over,
painting over everything, like putting lipstick on the faces and everything else. It's
like listening to like Phil Collins or something.
Right. Like taking this beautiful art and degrading it, and then calling it good. Which is exactly what he does. He says, this is so wonderful, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, sexual activity, again, taken outside, it's taking this beautiful picture that God has made with particular purpose to illustrate a particular thing, and it's slapping paint all over it and saying, look what I've done. Look, I've done something really wonderful,
To carry the illustration, marriage, if you guys have ever done the paint by numbers thing, it's literally a paint by numbers thing. God has already set the parameters of it. He's already given the colors in which you ought to use with it. He's given specific ways in which you ought to fill in and shade. And so when you are basically doing whatever the heck you want with it, what you come out with is not something that's beautiful, not something that's well done, not something that's art, but something that has defied the actual original purpose of what it was created to be.
Right. And if anything, it's a shell of what it was supposed to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think we should call this episode Friends, Batman, and Paint by Numbers.
Yeah.
It would have to be the one. It would have to.
That is the secret code for the book. Friends, Batman, and Paint by Numbers.
There it is. That's a good one. Friends, Batman, Paint by Numbers. The first person to put Friends, Batman, and Paint by Numbers in the YouTube comments will get this beautiful book.
Nice.
Delivered to their front door or their mailbox or wherever it goes.
So the biblical understanding then of marriage looks like a relationship of sexual complementarianism, I guess. The kind of which, again, if all is functioning correctly, can produce children, and it has a husband and a wife, showing forth the mystery of Christ and the church. And so once we have those foundations in place, all of the commandments surrounding sex make way more sense now, that they're not just divine whim, but they have a purpose. There is an internal moral logic that renders then every kind of adultery and fornication, bestiality, homosexuality, prostitution, any violation of God's sexual design, it renders it, again, sinful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I be really direct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I be really direct? And this may be too direct for some people, but I'm saying this with complete sincerity and love.
Mm-hmm.
Your pornography addiction is doing what we just said.
Yeah.
Because statistically, somebody listening to this has a pornography addiction.
Absolutely.
That pornography addiction is what everything that we just said about the foundational elements, about God's purpose for sexuality. Your pornography addiction is working to undermine what God has done in creation and undermine the relationship of Christ and his church. Like, it is a sinful, horrible thing that is destroying you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that
you are not the victim.
Yeah.
No,
there's this weird thing. There's this weird thing with sexual sin in particular that people try to make, and I think it's maybe because it is embarrassing that people try to make themselves the victim of the story. Yeah. Like that sexual sin is some kind of monster that breaks into your house and you're cowering in the corner trying to defend yourself, but you just can't, and it attacks you.
Well,
if you're a Christian, well, no, go ahead, Jack.
No, you're not wrong. Like, I was going to agree with you. We are completely responsible, but I don't want to be unsympathetic, because in the spirit of common Christian struggles, like, we live in a world that is, I mean, we just talked about one of the most popular TV shows in history, how its entire existence was based on undermining this stuff.
But we don't say that same thing about murder.
We don't. No.
Like, someone who murders someone, we don't say, like, well, the culture, and it's just, the we got to be sympathetic toward the murderer.
No. Well, all I was going to say is, I'm not saying sympathy. It's really hard. Like, if you didn't grow up in the church, you have been trained from the day you began to understand that sex is no big deal.
Yeah.
Well, I'll speak to this one, actually. I'll just share with you. When I was 7 years old, literally 7 years old, was the first time I was exposed to pornography. I went bike riding with a group of friends, and we went beyond the place where we were supposed to go. So there's an object lesson right there. Do not let sinners entice you in the way, right? And we went well beyond where we were supposed to. And in that same day, I was exposed to alcohol, tobacco, and a Penthouse magazine. That's 7 years old.
And we all have bad childhood friends. And if you don't have a bad childhood friend, you were the bad childhood friend.
Or hopefully you're just that extremely blessed person.
Blessed person that didn't have,
Yeah. But I look at that and it's like, okay, so I'm literally the textbook example of somebody who was exposed to it in an extremely early time. And it was an extremely difficult thing to get beyond when I first came to faith. But the reality is that once I actually came to faith and saw the evil for what it was, and how deep-rooted that sin was in my own life, I did everything I could to get away from it. I mean, that whole idea of radical amputation, we'll touch on that more when we get to that finally at a later point in a separate podcast. We're already up hitting an hour right now. Yeah. But that was a point where for me it was, okay, here's where things actually become real. And here's where your profession of faith actually has legs to it. And that's not me saying you're not going to have struggles as you battle this sin, but you actually have to battle it. And it should be an all-out war. And I mean all-out war. Do everything you can to get rid of it, because it will consume you.
Yeah. And I think that what I was getting at is, while you view yourself as the victim, you won't make ground.
No.
Yeah.
And but the real victim is Christ in the church. I mean, the real victim is the gospel. Paul gets into really graphic terms in 1 Corinthians 5, where he talks about the man who has been sleeping with his mother-in-law. And he actually talks about this reality where he is, if you've joined yourself to a prostitute even, what you have done by being connected to the body of Christ, he says you have joined Christ himself to the prostitute. And it's just, it's a horrendous picture. But that's the reality of what he speaks to, is that the same thing Blake's saying. We are not the victims. We are the perpetrators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, so now that we've kind of laid down the foundations of all of this, what we want to do in the next episode or two, if it's going to continue at the pace that it's continuing, what we want to do is really lay down kind of a risk assessment of what exactly is at risk with sexual sin. We want to get to the practical helps. We want that unfolding of the seventh commandment is really, really helpful in light of the foundations that we've already laid. So we hope that you'll join us next time that we are together with part 2 of Common Struggles of the Christian Life, Lust and Sexual Sin.
Yeah, well said. Grayson, anything in closing? I know we're kind of ending it abruptly here, but I think this is the right thing to do. I don't think we want to... There's so... Like we said in the beginning, I think this is worth taking our time and taking bites.
The only thing I'd close with is really the healthy foundation of what biblical marriage is to look like in all its aspects should be the governing principle as we're looking at how to fight lust. You can beat yourself up in every which way, and in some ways it's appropriate to feel that shame. But ultimately, it's every aspect of sin. If you're only looking at the negative, you're never going to actually move towards what's positive. So there's put-offs and there's put-on. And this is the same as every other thing that you battle with. And so if we can encourage you, at least in this beginning podcast episode, I know some parts were pretty heavy, but look at it in that light and say, okay, I know I need to put this sin off, but what do I need to put on? Well, everything you just listened to is what we need to put on and reteach and relearn what is true biblical sexuality and the way that honors God.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said and very apt, Grace. And I'll add too that to maybe piggyback on what Grayson was saying, that it is easy to feel so much shame, and there's good reason for that, right? We saw that in the garden. We saw the shame come out, the shame of sin, right? How they cover themselves. And this is an incredibly serious subject. It is a very unique sin, an extraordinarily relevant sin to everything going on in our day and age. But I don't want you to despair, right? If you are in the bonds of pornography, if you are stuck in that, repent, get accountability, seek Christ, find Christ more beautiful than that sin.
Practice gratitude.
Gratitude
drowns out the strangely, and we can talk about this more next time. Practicing a spirit of gratitude drowns out all kinds of sinful thinking.
Yeah,
including lust.
Yep. Well said. Yeah, and there is forgiveness. There's hope. The blood of Christ can cover these sins. So do not despair.
Yeah. And you were made for more than that. You were made for more than to be a dog eating vomit. You're made in the image of God. If you're a Christian, you are beloved by Christ. You're part of his body. Stop submitting your members to sin.
Yep. And stop watching Friends.
It's not funny, all right?
You have given yourself to vileness and purity and Friends.
Joey is not funny. His character is not funny. Can we stop pretending he is? Anyway, I'm done. Thanks so much for listening to the Chorus and Chaos. This is part 1. We'll be back with at least one more episode. I suspect there may be 2 more on this topic. That would be my prophecy. My Presbyterian prophecy.
Good night, everyone.